Hi, my name is Jabari Khaliq. I'm an actor, photographer, videographer, and once again, I'm coming to you as an alumni of UIC's theater program. If you're unfamiliar, earlier this year in January, I released an entire online video that served as my student evaluation for my time at UIC. Quite a few people in the community saw it. The heads of the department definitely saw it, and honestly, right away we had a meeting that basically covered the points that I mentioned in the video, some points that I couldn't cover in the video, along with several other things that over the course of the past few months made me feel like I think there needs to be a follow-up video. The primary reason why I'm making this follow-up video, and even why I made the last video, honestly, is because I do feel like there is a certain lack of candidness and transparency when it comes to what happens in these institutions. It's hard for a 17, 18, 19-year-old to just go online and figure out what school that they're going to. When it comes to UIC and UIC's theater school in particular, I kind of can't really find much that says, okay, here's what's going on. Here's how a student who went there feels today. And it's a resource that I wish that I had when I was looking for schools. I decided that I wanted to make something that was public documentation for future students who not only look into UIC's theater, but theater school in general. What should you look at when deciding to pick a school? Because the issues that come up aren't just specific to UIC. There needed to be a different way to hold this institution accountable. To my knowledge, there's no real public documentation of what goes on at UIC. So when they say they're holding themselves accountable, I ask, to who are you holding yourself accountable to? And what story are you telling to people who are unaware of what goes on? Come to find out, even after I release my video, the story still is that UIC doesn't have the specifics that they need to do further action than what they're already trying to do. Honestly, was a quick response. A few days after I released the video, I had a meeting with Yasin and Christine, the heads of the department at UIC. Basically just talked about several things that I couldn't mention in the video because the video was so long. They also wanted to use the meeting as an opportunity to inform me about efforts that they have been taking since I've graduated to fix the culture issues at UIC. So now that we're at the end of the semester and I did kind of make an entire evaluation on my experience, I did want to follow up. So the primary purpose of this video is to talk about the meeting that I had with Yasin and Christine, primarily to include the details that they really want people to know about their school and the efforts that they're making to improve the culture. And then also, I felt the need to take things a step further and provide more specifics that they feel like they do not have. I'm really just gonna get into it. I had my meeting with Yasin and Christine. I think I dropped that video on a Thursday or a Friday. I met with them like the following Tuesday. And I guess the primary reason why this video exists is because I think what I walked away with from that meeting was very bizarre. I really do appreciate Yasin and Christine sitting down with me and giving me their time because it did provide a lot of clarity to the situation of the school that I went to. The thing, however, that I found most alarming about my meeting with Yasin and Christine is that even up until now, there is a lot of ignorance still being claimed. They had said that it wasn't until a Facebook post that I made in 2019 that they didn't realize that they had real race-related issues in UIC. That means that there's so much that still happened in recent memory that is either unacknowledged or that they're unaware about. The other thing that I found alarming is that they really wanted me to know that they're currently lacking specifics, or at least as of January, they were really lacking specifics of what was going on in their school. Primarily because from my perspective as a student who went there and as a student who has been in contact with a bevy of other students, there should be enough specifics for them not to still be saying that in 2021. The thing that Christine did assure me is that she reads almost every evaluation. Even if she hears a small negative comment or a whisper of something going down in a staff member's classroom, she'll go back and she'll read every evaluation. I did get assurance on that. What was told to me is that the majority of UIC students don't evaluate. There was a constant push for me to understand and know that under 50% of UIC students apparently evaluate the classes that they are taking for the theater school. I think that Christine really led with, that she really wanted me to know, and believes that she has the utmost respect and confidence in her faculty members. She believes that the issues at hand are not personal issues of prejudice and discrimination. These are issues that are simply blind spots, and that they are currently working through and learning these blind spots. Also reiterated that every faculty member on UIC staff are aware that they have these blind spots, and they are working through and are wanting to and willing to work through these blind spots, and that they are taking all the steps to do so. So at the end of the day, after really going through everything that I said in my video and everything that I even mentioned in the first half of our meeting, the ultimate conversation that really took over the meeting was, what were the specifics and where are the specifics? According to Yasin and Christine, they don't really have enough. They don't really have the specific details of what occurred from every specific faculty. The reason why it alarms me is because it really makes me nervous about where UIC is. You know, for example, one of the major topics that came up in the first half of the meeting that I didn't discuss in my first video that I wanted to discuss to Yasin and Christine was how dialect is taught at UIC. The issue for me that arises with how dialect is taught at UIC is that the logic that is applied to the general American dialect is often applied to the African American vernacular English in the Black community, formerly known as Ebonics. But essentially just like the different ways that Black people talk. To sum up the issue, just so I don't really expand too much into the tangent, just like how when we learn the British dialect, we learn like 5 different ways to talk in a British dialect, because it's such a nuanced way that they talk. Black people, because we are not a monolith, the way that we talk in our dialects range so differently just in a regional sense. Just Black people in Chicago, Black people from the south suburbs do not talk like Black people from the west side of Chicago. It's just even in a regional sense. So there's no real way to teach an actor how to play a specific Black character. You don't really get any type of resources or tools to navigate that. Whereas white students just learn their home accents, learn Janam, and it's just a slight adjustment and they're good. Whereas it's very complex for Black students, and it becomes very problematic when it's time to teach students how to do Black dialects, because you kind of can't teach someone how to do a Black dialect. There kind of really isn't one way to do it. It's art. That it becomes a very weird way to police art. The reason why I bring this up as a cause for concern when Christine asked for specifics is when I told her this entire nuanced way that Black students are impacted by dialect teaching. I even broke it down in a longer way than I did for you just now. The primary takeaway for her in that moment then was to have a guest speaker come in and speak to students for 2 hours. That's not even a start to the nuanced ways that dialect teachings affects Black students. So I still feel like there's a disconnect, and it makes me wonder if Christine and Yasin have had their specifics for a very long time and just still don't register. Because I think even in that moment, months later after thinking about the meeting, I still think she didn't fully understand what I was trying to say, and I broke it down very eloquently and beautifully as she told me. So before I even go deeper into the specifics of what goes on at UIC, I did want to talk about the second half of what happened in our meeting, and that was discussing what UIC is currently doing now to fix their cultural issues that happened in their theater program. The first thing that they wanted me to know is that they did launch their Anti-Racist Action Committee. And they did, I think even a few weeks before I posted my video, even posted an online anti-racism action plan that can be found on their website. The first part of their plan was to dedicate time to launching this committee, as well as establishing various positions like an associate director position that's going to be dedicated to support equity, diversity, and inclusion work. They also are establishing an annual budget line to support the work of this committee and the School of Theater and Music, as well as commitment to recruiting and hiring Black, Indigenous, people of color faculty and staff. They've made several other promises on this action plan, such as making a promise and pledge to recruit BIPOC students, as well as assuring accountability and prioritizing transparency, community inclusion, open dialogue, and regular outreach. They wanted to let students know that they have open meetings for this committee that students are welcome to attend. That was a major thing that they wanted to let people know. One thing that they really want to do is to establish this community and to grow this community that's dedicated to fixing these issues. They also let me know about their solidarity statement, their land acknowledgement. If you don't know, a land acknowledgement is simply just a long document that acknowledges the land that you are currently on that was stolen from an indigenous community, because America. My one gripe with the land acknowledgement is that, to my knowledge, there are no indigenous students at UIC. I just really hope that they continue to move forward and reaching out and including that community if that's something that's going to be at the top of what they've done in their cultural reform. I said they created budget for this work and have included UIC alum Deanna Myers in their anti-racist training. They plan to involve other alumni in the future in this process. Christine has also hired an Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, Anti-Racism Associate Director. This man's name is James McNally. He is a white man. And not only is he a white man, but he is currently employed on UIC staff as a music lecturer. And they also cited the WeCU White American Theater as the basis of a lot of the work that they're doing at UIC. In the same breath, however, UIC says that as a faculty, they are having differing opinions on the use of the N-word in 2021 and how it should be used in class, or when it should be used in class. In the meeting, I also found Christine very unwilling to discuss the experiences of UIC students who had just recently graduated, specifically students who had recently graduated in the last 2 or 3 years. One thing that she said was that she wanted to be held accountable for who she is now, to a student who at the time had attended classes with half of her BFA program. Christine also expressed the specific desire that I needed to quantify some of the experiences that I mentioned in my last video. Reason of why she felt like it was very important. She struggled to find a reason, but landed on the fact that it would make me more credible when talking about my experiences as a UIC student and what's going on at UIC. I kind of figured that, considering that my experiences compounded with the fact that more than one student has come forward sharing similar stories, should be enough for credibility in her eyes, but she really felt like she wanted to know if this is one student or 2 or 3 students. The biggest takeaway from the meeting was that UIC told me that they were struggling to find specifics to really identify the issues that they had at hand, specifically with the issues that they had with professors that weren't Jonathan Abarbanel. But in the same breath, they are hesitant to hear stories about students who attended the school even 2 years ago because they want to be held accountable for who they are today. It was bizarre. My biggest takeaway was it was interesting to hear all the things that they're currently doing now. I am very intrigued by the idea of this anti-racist training and what that entails. But primarily, I really had to sit with this idea that Christine wanted numbers. The issue was one of 2 things. Either they don't have a pulse on what's actually going on in their school, or they do know what's going on in their school and they simply just are not acknowledging it. Regardless, I still don't know how close the heads of UIC's department really is to change, because I do not know how much they truly understand how their students feel. I do want to state that at the time of this recording, I do know that there are several things that have happened. I do know that Derek Sanders has taken another position elsewhere, so I believe he is no longer working at UIC. And then also, I do know that UIC has taken further actions, such as employing at least 3 new employees. All, I believe, are people of color, as well as doing more extensive work to reaching out to their current students and asking them about their experiences. So work still is being done at UIC. They're not sitting on their asses doing nothing. However, I still wonder what message is being sent to their students who currently go there, because the students who currently go there now still have the same exact complaints. So while there's efforts being made in meetings and behind closed doors and in the corporate business sense, students still feel the same. So I really do wonder what's going on and what message is being communicated. And I really did wonder how students felt. I really did wonder how big was the issue. So then it really did take me back to Christine's craving for me to quantify this issue. Even after I told her how I think students feel about UIC, she asked me, do I believe the good outweigh the bad? And I wanted to find out. So transparency about this survey. All students in the survey were a part of UIC's class of 2016 through UIC's class of 2024. The identities of the 68 students will remain anonymous, as well as the professors that are mentioned in this survey. Their identities will remain anonymous for this video. UIC's department will receive a transcript of the written responses and the survey responses of what I'm about to present in this video and present to you right now. So for our first question, has a faculty member at UIC's theater program ever made you feel unsafe? If so, how many? The responses that we got, about 17.6% says yes, only one. About 44.1% says yes, more than one. A little under 6% says yes, at least the majority of the theater faculty has made them feel unsafe. And finally, we have 32.4% saying no, a faculty member at UIC's theater program has never made them feel safe. For our second question, if yes is your response to question number 1, have you ever reported such acts to Yasin, Christine, an academic advisor, or in a student evaluation? 35.8% says yes, they have reported a particular act that made them feel unsafe, while over 64% admitted that they did not report such acts to Yasin, Christine, an academic advisor, or in a student evaluation. When asked how often have you had a negative personal experience with a staff member outside of class and office hours, we had 19% saying yes, only one. Over 41% saying yes, with more than one faculty member. We also have 7.4% saying yes, with at least the majority of the theater faculty. And finally, we have 32.4% saying no, they have not had a negative personal experience with a staff member outside of class or office hours. When asked, have you personally experienced or witnessed acts that support or contribute to the systems of racism, homophobia, transphobia, or misogyny? The results we have is that 39.7% says yes to all of the above. They've either witnessed or experienced these acts. 50% says that they've witnessed or experienced at least 2 of these systems, while 10.3% says no, they have not experienced or witnessed any racism, homophobia, transphobia, or misogyny in UIC's theater. The next question we have is, have you witnessed a professor at UIC use a variant of the word nigger at your time at UIC, and was this a one-time occurrence? The results we have for the survey is that 14.7% says yes, and this is something that they witnessed one time. 20.6% says yes, and this is something that I've witnessed more than once. 47.1% says no, I have not witnessed this, but I've heard about it. And 17.6% says no, I've had no idea non-black professors were using any variation of the word nigger in class. The next question we have is, as a student, past or current, do you believe that UIC's faculty should be forward and open with students about consequences that staff members face after multiple occurrences of social and personal insensitivity? The response to this answer was very one-sided. 80.9% says yes, this is extremely appropriate. 16.2% says yes, this is somewhat appropriate, while a little under 3% says no, this is slightly inappropriate. So a resounding 97% believes that this is something that they believe is very appropriate for staff to do with their student body. On average per semester, how often did you do your student evaluations for the theater school? 51.5% says that they did every single theater evaluation, while only 23.5% says that they did the majority of their theater classes. 13.2% says that they evaluated the classes that they felt needed it most. And then only 11.8% of students in the survey says that they were really bad at submitting their evals, one if any. When asked what is your racial and ethnic background, 38.2% of the survey identifies as Black or African American, 22.1% of the survey identifies as Latino, 27.9% identifies as white. The next part of the survey asks students to rate their experiences at UIC on a scale of 1 to 10. So the first question that we have is that could you rate your UIC experience on a scale of 1 to 10? 1 being I should have chose a different path, 10 being this was the perfect fit for me. While the majority of the survey ranged from a 5 to a 7, around 17% ranged from a 1 to a 3. 13% of the survey responding around an 8 or 9. Our next question asks, if you are a non-white UIC student, how visible creatively did you feel during your time at UIC? The majority of students of color at UIC in the survey responded a 5 or less. Only about 38% of students of color in the survey wanted to rate their UIC experience a 6 or higher. The next question asks the same thing for LGBTQ students. How visible did you feel during your time at UIC? Only about 25% of the LGBTQ students in the survey wanted to rate their visibility a 6 or higher. Same thing for students who identify as women. How visible creatively did you feel during your time at UIC? This time, around 23.4% of women in the survey wanted to rate their visibility a 6 or higher. And finally, when asked to rate the student-staff relationship during your time as a UIC student, only about 32% of the survey wanted to rate the student-staff relationship a 6 or higher in the survey. In the final portion of the survey, because I do understand it is a smaller sample size of the entire student body at UIC over the course of these years, I did want to provide an opportunity for the people in the survey to write in written responses about specific experiences that they had at UIC that Yasin and Christine feel like that they are still missing. Considering that these questions were optional, I thought the quality of responses from the people in the survey were passionate, strong, and I think provided me a lot of clarity with what is going on at UIC. So I really felt like a lot of these testimonials were really important for this video, so I'm going to include them for everyone to watch. The very first question that we have is, what is the best thing outside of your degree that you obtained at your time at UIC? This is varied. There's one response in particular I think came up. I'm just gonna read a few that we have though. Nothing, not outside of my degree. The classmates that I made connections with, my friends. I got a business minor. Going to Spain changed my world. Learned how to stage manage, even though that wasn't my major and mostly free labor for them. Honestly, it wasn't many highlights, just grateful to be able to do what I was able to do at the time being. The ability to make things happen on my own, as well as time management. I was basically forced to complete 21 and 23 credit hours my last year at UIC because my advisor did not advise me well during my sophomore year. There were classes I was supposed to take that were mandatory that were not brought up until the last minute. I hated the fact I was super stressed my last year, juggling working on 2 shows, working on my first full-time job whenever I could, finishing demanding assignments, as well as maintaining a social life, when all of this could have been avoided had I gotten the classes I was supposed to take earlier in my career at UIC. Another student says, honestly, I do feel like I've been able to learn things in class and better myself as an actor. Trauma included, unfortunately, but at least I have a process to rely on now in my acting. And add another thing, I value the connections that I've made through UIC, as well with a few of the faculty who understand that I am more than an actor. I have an innovative look when it comes to creativity for spaces since we lived in a basement. I feel like I've grown as an actor as a white woman since all the classes fit me as a person and encouraged me to succeed. Confirmation that white people, staff members, and councils will do any and everything to protect themselves from harm, criticism, and admission of guilt. It's understanding fully how political each part of this industry is going to be. Whatever family or community they think is at UIC at the end of the day won't matter when it comes to the quality of resources you will receive. It all comes down to who's your friend. What professor really likes you? What professor low-key wants to fuck you? Do you look like their ideal of attractive? If you check yes to any of the boxes, you will be in their elite few no matter how hard you do or don't work. And if you don't, you'll have to fight for the scraps. It's confirmation about what I already knew about the world, but to see it play out in a theater school setting where all teachers claim to care about our development will forever stick with me. A realization of the injustices that can occur in theater and an institution. LOL. Another student says, I feel I was forced to create my own curriculum, as the one provided for me was inadequate, and this led to me finding plenty of opportunities for myself. The best thing to ever happen to me was when I picked up my sociology minor my junior year and had an excuse to get out that basement. It opened my eyes to how other classrooms were being run and the type of progressive conversations and experiences that were happening on campus. It was a shock that this wasn't reflected in the program of my major. My minor in disability and human development. The DHD program was incredibly inclusive, and I found that the DHD staff made me feel comfortable and welcome. I met a lifelong group of friends who I consider my family, and 2 people who I made a theater company with. I discovered my love for writing, producing, and directing since I was neglected in the field of acting. My classmates. I lucked out. My year had a very diverse and hardworking ensemble, and in general, the majority of the student body is made of beautiful, creative, tenacious underdogs. To make up for the lack of resources and care, we really were aware that we had to rely on each other to make things happen. Skills taught in some of the classes have been very valuable. Lydia Diamond and Colette Pollard are the best teachers UIC has, and both of them give me confidence in myself and my own ability. Truly 2 of the most amazing teachers I have ever had. And finally, another student writes, I gained friendships that'll last a long time and the determination to do work I want to do. Not because that's what UIC taught me, but because I felt so anxious at UIC, I'm determined to never feel that way again. Second question asks, describe your overall experience with the UIC Mainstage as a UIC student. I've been fortunate to be cast in multiple productions at my time at UIC, and I've learned something different about myself as an actor and an artist in each one. However, I have watched several of my skilled peers of different backgrounds and identities be overlooked because they don't fit into whatever mold UIC decides to place people into. One student in the survey writes, I've been a part of 3 Mainstage performances and personally, I've had a great time. However, BAs rarely got a chance to thrive on Mainstage productions unless you were a part of a lucky few that got in and got leads. I also didn't audition for as many shows because some of them didn't interest me and I worked full time. Another student writes, I feel as though as a BA, you need to work 10 times harder to prove you can be on a Mainstage production. I am not including understudies. They normally give those spots to BFA. The opportunities are just harder for BA students. Another student writes, as a transfer BA, there are few opportunities to be on the main stage, and even more importantly, once you're there, you're treated like an afterthought. Students and staff alike feel very comfortable diminishing the accomplishments, wants, and needs of BA and BA transfer students. We constantly hear from staff and BFA students that we're not as serious about our careers and education, and that we're taking an easier path. This notion is ridiculous, and so is the lack of education in the BA course load. As a transfer, UIC didn't offer any acting classes I hadn't already taken elsewhere. The one main stage role of Tribe I had was not a positive experience, as we were charged a costuming fee and then immediately asked to bring our own clothes? Why did you take my $50? Another student writes, I can't complain too much. I was given the opportunity to be a part of 5 productions over my 4 years. I enjoyed myself during each one. However, I did have a small feeling stick with me that I didn't belong on the main stage since I wasn't a BFA, but that could have just been my own doing. I will say I felt like I was pushed the most and stretched during the shows I did in the studio, and it also felt like the safest place to do so. The studio show I was a part of was one of my favorite memories of UIC. I barely had any experience as I was not a BFA and never felt as though I was encouraged to audition or properly prepared, as most resources were not accessible. BAs are very overlooked. Generally, BAs don't get enough callbacks, but this is for a variety of reasons. Number 1, they don't audition. Number 2, since they don't have BFA teachers, they aren't trusted with their skills and abilities. BA students have better luck being cast when an outside director comes in. My personal experience with the main stage was meh. I was an understudy twice, assistant directed twice, was in the ensemble once, and got to do design work for 2. I was very involved, but as a performer, I felt slept on. I learned a lot, but it only motivated me to do my own work so I could actually apply what I was learning in classes. I was not satisfied with my main stage experience. UIC caters to white BFA students when it comes to their main stage plays. Time and time again, they show favoritism and lack of range when it comes to casting and picking the season. In my entire time there at UIC, there have only been 4 opportunities for black students to play leads. UIC only makes room for 1 POC show a year, and everything else is extremely whitewashed. In my experience at UIC, it is clear that POC shows have the lowest funding. There is little to no research done when it comes to props, costumes, and hair. There are no accommodations for black students, period. The black students pay for the hairstyles out of pocket for the shows that we have. I have seen UIC pay for non-black students haircuts, wigs, extensions, etc. The basic accommodations for the dressing rooms do not exist for black students. It's clear discrepancies in the ways that we are treated, and when we speak up about it, we are written off, ridiculed, ignored, or gaslit. UIC didn't even finish the set for Florissant and Canfield. They insist on putting on classical plays that are outdated in ideology and in relevancy. It's abundantly clear that UIC prioritizes BFA students over the BA when it comes to education and the main stage plays. Their theater season is washed and tired. Same people, different plays. Got a lead once as a BFA major while watching many others get cast in leads 5 or 6 times. I don't think getting cast was based on work ethic, rather on if the faculty liked you. Saw this firsthand in an email exchange with an outside artist, which I technically wasn't supposed to see, but saw anyways. The UIC main stage casting is very skewed. Favorites are obvious, and a majority of students who pay thousands of dollars to be there are ignored. Why did UIC accept these students if they never planned on fostering their growth? Also, as an understudy for a main stage in my senior year, I had to beg for an understudy run for one of my shows. I begged the director to allow us to have an opportunity to use the thousands of dollars I spent. He wanted nothing to do with the run, and I basically created it. He didn't even come to the show. Another student says, empty. Despite being a literal directing major, I had no opportunities to assistant direct, despite constantly asking and prodding and reaching out, and only 2 opportunities in my whole 4 years to participate in main stage productions. I love the main stage. I've had some of my best times on that stage, and I'm grateful for every single opportunity. My only concern at the time was not having enough time on stage, but the opposite of feeling like I was getting too much time on stage. Not only did I feel it was unfair to my peers and putting others at a disadvantage, but it started to negatively affect my physical and mental health in a great way. We go to school to learn, and especially when it comes to art, knowledge isn't about competition, money, or recognition. I understand the need to prepare us for the industry, but when it's at the sacrifice of the progression of another student's education, on both ends, it's not worth it. There is always more room for better representing plays. Right now, all UIC offers is 3 classical plays, which are bound to mainly consist of Caucasian casts, and 1 ethnic play, and that's not even guaranteed. There are many other voices and cultures being silenced. It was lovely to play a variety of roles, but I so wish the season would have included more opportunities for me to play roles that actually looked like me and that I could relate to more. Another student writes, also, let me just real quick speak on behalf of one of my best friends in the department who was a woman of color. This school failed her. How are they gonna give her no shows that she can identify with? As someone who doesn't fit into a single ethnic racial box, this girl wasn't in a show until her senior year. That is a joke. Many women, men and women of color, and gender non-conforming students in our department are going to graduate with the BFA in acting and have 1 to 2 shows on their resume. That is a failure. Agents, casting directs, etc. are going to question why they weren't the lead in more shows. And I can only wish that people feel empowered and confident enough to know that it's not their fault and it's not any comment on their self-worth or talent. The system failed them. Casting was a huge issue. I got to witness the discussions on the reasonings behind why certain people should be cast and why they should not. Oftentimes, the white faculty members would recommend people based off of how they work in class. Class work ethic should not come into the casting decision. The main stage was essentially presented to us as the end-all be-all of talent. and we were made to believe that we were worthless if not put up on it. We were expected to sacrifice the rest of our lives to be on that stage and to be grateful. My first main stage was my sophomore year when I had just turned 19. Our director constantly singled me out and belittled me and established his power in the room by deliberately intimidating the women in the cast. This was being my first encounter with the main stage. I was indoctrinated into believing that the actor-director relationships were meant to be fear-based, that it was normal to feel anxious and powerless in the rehearsal room, and that I was ungrateful or weak for wanting to act in an environment that felt nurturing and inclusive. One student writes, "It always felt like you were only worthy if you were on the main stage, and even then, not really. The most emotionally and verbally abusive teacher I had only truly started to change her ways towards me when working with her on a main stage senior year. Overall, I think more than half of the time the ways in which people were cast didn't even seem to feel fair, and if you were a person of color, it was even harder. It felt like the only time we were represented was the one black play per season. Hours were not in support of students who had to work to get through school like myself, let alone excel in other classes as well as gen ed classes. Main stage was the most draining part of my time at UIC. If you are not a part of UIC's special few, you have to jump through hoops just to get a small speaking role. It feels like they make you go through extra steps like understudying a certain amount of times in order to be cast in something that actually betters a young actor. I think it's a power dynamic that's used on a lot of students, especially considering most of our directors and coaches are our professors in class daily. They'll often connect the two, and students are rarely treated equally because of this. Once you finally do make it on the main stage, you instantly feel exploited. You're asked to put in these hours without considering that it's not a regular class. And when students who have never had to juggle these types of work days struggle, they get told it's just the way it is by their professors, which I find as an odd teaching choice, considering it would seem to be more helpful to just give me the resources to deal with these challenges rather than fail me, belittle me, or discourage me from pursuing my career. That is not what I paid for. Another student writes, "I have gained the most valuable learning moments from being an overstudy on the main stage. If I had the opportunity to be on the main stage more, I think I could have learned a lot more and could have learned how to put those tools that I've learned in action. I do feel like being an understudy was a complete waste of my time. Being at the table reads and for tech was super beneficial as an understudy, but for the most part, I spent my time doing absolutely nothing. My time was never considered, and even though I put my availability on my contact sheet the day of auditions, I was still expected to be at every rehearsal. This meant I had to switch my work hours from after school to before school. My time was never considered, and even though I put my availability on my contact sheet the day of auditions, I was still expected to be at every rehearsal. This meant I had to switch my work hours from after school to before school. I was at work from 6 to 10 a.m. and at school and at rehearsal until 10 or even 11 p.m. on top of an hour commute, which meant I had little to no time for homework that is expected to be done for both of my theater classes and my gen eds, and I was only getting like 4 to 5 hours of sleep a night. I was told by one professor that I should get a new job, and by another that I should quit and have my parents help me pay my rent, which is completely ridiculous to even consider, as I do not have that luxury and they knew that I did not. Furthermore, in the handbook, it states that directors are allowed to schedule 25 hours a week of rehearsals, but most directors are scheduling 5 to 10 hours on top of that a week, and it's somehow become common to have rehearsal on weekends as well. UIC claims to be cognizant of students and their needs, yet time and time again, I was shown they do not. My whole life is not lived in UIC's dirty, dark-ass basement, and I'm tired of professors acting as if it is. My identity is not student. Fast? Confusing? I only got to work on UIC's Mainstage twice during my time at UIC, and both times felt very different from the other. I worked with Yasin Payankov and generally had a fine time. I was treated very much like a paid actor. As an understudy with the guest director, he never spoke to me personally or even addressed me. I would watch our teachers giggle as he would flirt and kiss his cast of young men and wish I could be anywhere but there. I was accused later in my evaluation of not taking more advantage of the role and being too shy and disinterested. If you were or are in the BA program, have you ever been discouraged from petitioning for a class? I was discouraged from taking the main class you should take as a senior, and that was auditions. The fact that BA acting majors had to petition to take that class anyway was the dumbest rule, considering BAs were there to act. I'm not sure if that rule changed, but hopefully it did, and I hope that they increased the class size as well. I felt as a transfer BA, I really had to prove my spot in the theater program. Since teachers really didn't know me, I felt as though I wouldn't get in. Every single time I petitioned for a class, I was discouraged. Several professors have discouraged me to petition for classes, even after I communicated how important I felt it was for my education. I've been discouraged from several professors, including Yasin. This was especially hurtful from him, as he promised I would be able to petition to get into any class when he convinced me to come to UIC in the first place. Yes, I was even kicked out of a few classes to make room for BFA actors who waited too long to take them. Not during my time in the BA, but I quickly auditioned into the BFA because I didn't want to be put into that position of being discouraged. From what I could notice, teachers did tend to favor certain BA students for BFA classes. BAs are highly encouraged to forge their own path as long as it doesn't shift into BFA territory. There have been many skills and workshops that I would have liked to learn, but it was turned down because of not being qualified or a distraction to completing my track. You should be able to petition for whatever class and have an honest assessment based on your work ethic, not your title of being a BA. I personally have not, but I've heard stories. Generally, that comes from professors thinking that the student won't be able to handle the workload, or simply that they're just not good enough. It sucks. If I was a BA student, I'd want a chance to prove myself. But if I was a teacher, I wouldn't want to push someone too much into the direction that they're not ready for. But if a student is more than capable and skillful, or at least motivated and willing, and they're still rejected, then there has to be some sort of underlying prejudice there. Another student writes, yes, I struggled for over a year to be allowed into script analysis and was told that I needed to give up my spot to a BFA who didn't even want to take the class. This was incredibly frustrating because it was a requirement course for my program as well as the BFAs, and yet the department would be willing to delay my graduation for someone I had been told was my equal. The final question the survey asked: one thing that Christine and Yasin say they need in order to do their jobs well that they are currently lacking are specifics. Are there any specific UIC experiences that you would like to share that is yet to be documented in totality? Student writes, the checkoff substitute that the UIC BFA class of 2021 endured, Andre. He was racist, sexist, and homophobic, and this has not been addressed by Yasin or Christine in a way that acknowledges the pain and overall detriment to our education. Another student writes, Andre was extremely misogynistic and racist throughout the whole semester. I had shown interest in playing a male character and he laughed in my face. I watched him continuously suggest black students play slaves and no other roles. My whole class was extremely vocal about our struggles with this class, especially to other faculty. Absolutely no one did anything to help us, and we were told over and over again that we should do something about it. The only reason Andre left was because our class blew up, and still no faculty member talked to us about the issue. The vetting process for substitutes needs to change or exist in literally any capacity larger than it does now. There needs to be some sort of conversation with students about the sub while they are teaching the class, not after. Although this feels shitty to say, I did not spend thousands of dollars for half of my time at UIC to be taught by mediocre subs. Student writes, my experience with Andre Smolko. He was sexist, racist, inappropriate, and never once has my class received an explanation or an apology. My ensemble had grievances about how the school was handling online learning. We felt as though our learning experience was unsatisfactory, that we were being treated like test subjects for this new system, and that we had anxieties about whether or not our showcase would be able to get us agents or work. The response that we got can be summed up as, watch your tone, we're working on it. And to this day, none of us have agents. If any of us do, that quantity is still in the single digits. One professor vocalized that there was nothing wrong with a white man playing a role intended for BIPOC actors during a class when students were expressing their discomfort with it. She just simply stated, if you guys could play white roles. The student writes, during my sophomore year, I auditioned for a guest director. During this audition where a UIC professor was present, this director told me that he hates Jews before I began. My professor giggled and said nothing. When I approached her directly after the audition, she said I shouldn't take it personally, that it's just his sense of humor, and that because he's in a minority group, he likes to tease other minority groups. She essentially told me to brush it off. When I went to this director directly, he shamed me for being too sensitive and told me to get used to it. I should note here, this was not the first time I had been told by faculty that in the theater world, I must suck it up. I did not report this event to Yasin and Christine because I feared more of the same. Specifically, my hope is that UIC never invites this director to return for any reason, and that they do everything in their power to eliminate racist, anti-Semitic, homophobic, transphobic, misogynistic, and bigoted behaviors such as the situation described above, and many others not dissimilar, especially those targeting women and BIPOC individuals. Another student writes, besides the above, there was a day in Shakespeare my senior year where a voice teacher subbed in. He screamed at someone for talking when she hadn't said a word. He screamed at the top of his lungs and said cruel things about her character. He was red in the face and absolutely berating her. She ran out of the room crying. Another student defended her, and the professor said something along the lines of, "Sorry, I know this was hard considering your situation at home." What a terrible thing to say, and I'm sure that she told him that in confidence. No repercussions occurred after this mean outburst. I just held my best friend as she cried, and no one did a thing. A voice professor came to sub my Shakespeare class one day, and he started by saying he was in a bad mood and to stay focused so he wouldn't get in a worse mood. During one classmate's scene, a classmate whispered a joke to another student, and this set this professor off. He began to yell at this classmate, he sent her out of class, and then proceeded to keep yelling at the rest of the class for about 20 minutes. This is a guess, but it definitely was an extended period of time. During this tantrum, he will pick out specific students in the room and bring up details of their personal life. A handful of us at the end were crying, and I had to scream at him to stop. He stopped class early and brought me into a hug and said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I reminded you of home, huh?" I was taken aback, since I had previously only alluded to some of the abuse I had received while growing up, in private, mind you, and I told him that that wasn't it. He proceeded to ask me and several other students, "You understand why I reacted the way I did, right?" I was not in the room, but I also did hear that the original student who was tossed out of class had an unsuccessful time bringing this event up to faculty. For a main stage production, a director wanted the character of Moss to identify as non-binary. At the time, neither actors identified as non-binary, and when we expressed concern that we would be doing a disservice by playing an identity that wasn't ours to play, the director said, "Fine, she'll be a bull dyke." Another student writes, my second year at UIC, over winter break I endured a robbery where I was physically abused and of course left with mental scars as well. On my first day back, I had class with my movement teacher and I was late coming into class. I explained to her that I was a bit off from the incident, having a hard time getting out of bed that morning and finding my ID to get into the building. She responded by asking me to show her proof that I was involved in a robbery, and even when I showed her the police report, she said it was fake. Her actions then and following always made me feel unsafe and extremely judged. She would often ridicule my work in front of my ensemble and outwardly ask for support from them to justify her actions. Another student writes, my brother had recently been hospitalized and was paralyzed from the neck down due to a surprise diagnosis of an autoimmune disease. I explained that this was causing me a lot of depression, and I asked my movement teacher if I could have an extension on my assignment. She specifically requested documentation of my brother's hospitalization, and when I told her I thought it was an inappropriate request, she told me that she did it for everyone in order to be fair. I later found out that she did not make this same request for other students who would ask for extension. A movement teacher telling a student they didn't work hard enough while having a concussion. Another professor gave me incredibly unclear instructions for a work study program and then talked badly behind my back when I misunderstood things. She then tried to say that my time working wasn't enough to graduate and tried to withhold crucial credits. One professor assuming that their black students didn't know how to draw their skeleton. In the height of the Me Too movement, almost being laughed at when asking for an intimacy rehearsal. When said rehearsal happened between a white student, a student of color, and the UIC movement professor, the student of color felt incredibly unsafe and uncomfortable and almost guilty, pushing the possibility of trust between the two students further. This same professor told students that they should know how to move their hips because of their ethnic background. Another student writes, although I do feel like I made a lot of important connections to the outside world from UIC, it is bittersweet because the connections I have made sometimes was used as an incentive not to speak up for things that I felt needed to be spoken. For example, I was in a class with a professor where I spoke up a bit about how students were treated, including myself. During my evaluation, the same professor said that he would remember me for the way that I conducted myself this semester in relation to speaking out against him. And that could be detrimental to working with him in the future. Although I do not regret being as outspoken as I was, it solidified to me that some teachers use their connection and status as a way to keep students from speaking out against them. Another student writes, yes, one professor has definitely crossed many boundaries and disrespected multiple groups of people. He told a gay man in my class that he couldn't play a role because he was too gay. He has also constantly assumed people's sexuality, including my own. He also feels the need to shame sex workers and speak on women randomly in class. He forced a Latinx girl to say nigger for a reading of our Mainstage show, and he's humiliated me personally in class to the point where I cried. He constantly uses his authority to scare and belittle black women. A professor once commented on my shaved head asking, why do you look like a skinhead? Knowing full well I'm Jewish. He intended it to be a joke, but an anti-Semitic remark from a faculty member should not be taken lightly. There was a time a faculty member asked me what I identified as racially. I guess since I have a tanner complexion? I don't know why this question was ever useful, and it was literally asked of me out of the blue with no previous interaction between myself and this instructor that day. Although I always hated how this question was asked, I always felt put on the spot, so I responded with, I identify as white, but I'm also Jewish. When I said that I was white, the instructor laughed at me and simply said, well, that doesn't count. Although I've heard much worse stories from others regarding race relations within UIC, I think this interaction highlights how some faculty like to create your identity for you and will laugh at you when you try to reshape their view of your identity, as if they have any right to define anyone else. To me, this interaction was extremely anti-Semitic, and definitely one of the interactions that sticks out to me when I recall my time within the UIC theater department. One professor at UIC often emotionally and mentally abuses his students with extra cruelty towards dark-skinned or monoracial black women. Asked about his prejudice and why he behaves this way, he says that he does it to prepare us for the world, which is a problematic mindset that stems from the strong black woman archetype. He spent months bullying me, shouting at me for no reason, insisting I was rude if I didn't acknowledge his presence, and cursing me out in public in the theater's lobby while I was on my phone with my dying grandfather. He doesn't take others into consideration and is reckless with his words. He often insulted my intelligence under the guise of criticism. He abused my power every chance that he got, and it's disturbing at how easy he is in making black women feel uncomfortable in his classes and at this school. I've gone to therapy because of this treatment that I faced at his hands. I personally do not think someone so evil should be allowed to teach at UIC. Another student writes, one time during a rehearsal, a director asked me and my scene partner to block a sexual scene and to just jump into it. My scene partner put himself in between my legs, and I was so uncomfortable that I had to call hold and ask to block this with an intimacy coordinator. This was in front of my entire cast. Later, my director's note to me was, she needs to get out of her head. At the top of contemporary performance study, my professor was complimenting my classmates who were leads in the latest UIC Mainstage show that I was also in. In front of the whole class, after complimenting them, she turned to me and said that I did a good job and that my breasts looked fantastic. I smiled it off, but I did have to have a private talk with her later about how uncomfortable that made me. There is a lack of student-teacher trust, and I believe a part of it has to do with the boundaries between students and teachers always being in flux depending on how a teacher felt. Sometimes we were students, sometimes actors, sometimes friends. But as students, we were often met with a lot of friction if we had any critique or complaints. Another student writes, two professors allowed for a very dated play to be used as source material in class, and this play happened to be riddled with racial slurs. Not once did either of them address the content they handed out or how the class should be handling it, which allowed for the sentence, "I really hate those niggers," to be said in class. I, as a nigger myself, was extremely uncomfortable and immediately felt unsafe as neither teacher stopped the piece, but let it happen and laughed it off, saying that we just simply won't do it in the next run. When I emailed the two of them, one professor admitted to shrinking a lot of his responsibilities in this class as a whole, that class being made up of transfer and BA students, in ways that he would not have done for BFA students. UIC staff also needs to consider students who pay for their education. Many of the staff bully working students and put them in positions of choosing a job or their education. Several professors are responsible for this. One professor often threatened to drop my grade based on me being 10 minutes late, even though I worked from 3 a.m. to 9:30 a.m. Another professor often goes overtime and will become angry when students leave for work, saying that this is the work. And Yasin's response to students financially struggling and wanting to be in shows was, "Well, BAs don't need to be in shows," so, while shrugging his shoulders. And this was during a majors meeting. It's incredibly demeaning and classist, seeing as scholarship opportunities are few and far between. One professor has said nigga at least 3 times in presence, and it makes him feel disingenuous when he later tries to connect with me. It screams white savior complex at the expense of real people's feelings. Another student says, Christine sat in a class and told black students their art lacked fundamental truths because they weren't things that she experienced firsthand. And then she took it a step further by saying that anyone who isn't black understand the project. I shouldn't have to explain why this comment is distasteful, but I will. There are countless classes that study plays that exclusively have white people in them. Students of color are forced to take these classes and find ourselves in them, but not once has anybody asked us that. Them claiming to need specifics is gaslighting when I and several other students have voiced our complaints to them firsthand, but instead of trying to understand where we were coming from, they get defensive. UIC misses the mark in every single way, and I hate that I wasted so much time and money at that school. Christine Mary Dunford simply does not understand black art or her black students, and she grades them differently because of this. We have tried to tell her on multiple occasions that her insisting that anyone can tell anyone else's story is contributing to cultural appropriation. She even asked white students specifically if they could relate to a black student's piece, which is offensive because that courtesy was never extended to black students. Being in that class felt like a constant fight for validation. It's actually funny that this has come up because I'm actually the student that these two people are referring. And I left it out of my last eval because it was a small part of the bigger picture, but since it's come up a couple times, I want to provide context. My senior year, I was in an adaptations class, and for the assignment, we were tasked to adapt somebody's life, make a performance piece based on somebody's life. So ultimately, I decided to do J. Cole because I wanted to use his music as a way of building a foundation for my script. I made a 10-minute movement piece about how racism is a systemic cycle in black families. It was received really well. A lot of people in the class loved it. And ultimately, when everyone gave their praises about, the images that they saw, the parallels to systemic racism that they noticed, Christine stepped up and said that she liked everyone's reaction, but she asked what was the fundamental truth. And that led into about a 6 to 10 minute discussion about whether there was a fundamental truth in my particular project. And it even came to a point where Christine was questioning whether or not white people could relate to it. She was trying to figure out a way, how could I change my story and make it relatable to a white audience? She even went as far as asking white students in the room who did not speak up, did they relate to it and how did they feel about it? While most of my peers really loved the assignment and it really connected and resonated with them, I ultimately got like a low B on the project. She ultimately said that I was not fulfilling the assignment's objectives. I understand that my intended audience and my target audience received my message, and I think the artist in me was fulfilled in that moment. Artistically, I got what I needed, so I left it alone. As a student, I was pissed. I'm not gonna lie, as a student, I know that I deserved an A. As a student, I stayed up till 3 a.m. blocking that. I incorporated tech cues that nobody else in that class had incorporated. I would even say that that particular assignment, which wasn't even a final project, had more production value than some students' final project in that class. But ultimately, that assignment never really got an A because of the disconnect that Christine had about whether or not white people should be able to understand every single ins and out of a fundamental truth. The way that I see it is that ultimately Christine heard an entire room of students get a fundamental truth, but because she did not receive the fundamental truth, I received a B or a C on that assignment. I think because she saw a story about a man that was not J. Cole on stage and was told that it was a piece about J. Cole, she couldn't process that. And ultimately my grade had to suffer because of it. And this is why it's so important that Black students have professors and teachers who can supplement their art, because I ultimately think I got a B or C on that assignment simply because Christine will culturally never understand where my art was coming from. Despite me explaining how the fundamental part of J. Cole's life was in the lyrics that I decided, despite me explaining how rap is used to tell one's life story, and despite me also supplying her with the script with the lyrics on it tied to exactly what I was doing with the blocking, she could not figure out where was the fundamental truth of J. Cole's life in my project. I and many peers would often sit in Christine's office explaining in detail our experiences with racism, discriminations, and profiling at UIC. Our tears and distress often amounted to nothing, as Christine and countless other staff members repeated offenses countless times. Whether it be a guest director commenting that he hates Jews and Yasin doing nothing about it, whether it be a professor repeatedly saying nigger and slipping it into his curriculum, or a professor verbally harassing students, especially Black women, each one of you are fully aware of your individual offenses and actions. Few of you admitting to these actions and never apologizing directly to students for them is proof that your attempts at changing UIC's racial politics is half-hearted and doomed to fail. One student writes, "When teaching voice work in the so-called general American dialect, being separated into groups of who needs the work, who needs some work, and who is basically perfect is traumatizing and completely uncalled for. It saddens me and most definitely affected me to see that in Voice 2, where we learn this so-called general American dialect, most of, if not all, the students of color were placed in the groups that needed the most work. It made it look like that we were dumb and that we needed to fully change the way we spoke in order to be seen and heard in the industry. It also does not help that everyone teaching you how to speak is white. The examples of actors seen on TV are white with a small drop of maybe one or two artists of color. The texts picked for class are heavily white, and there's no conversations about how this affects BIPOC artists. When we are separated into these groups of where we stand in our general American dialects, the students who supposedly needed the most work were the students who honestly got the least amount of class time to work. It also does not help that everyone teaching you how to speak is white. The examples of actors seen on TV are white, with a small drop of maybe one or two artists of color. The texts picked for class are heavily white, and there is no conversation about how this affects BIPOC artists. When we are separated into these groups of where we stood in our general American, the students who were supposedly needing the most work were students who honestly got the least class time to work. Another student writes, "I learned way more from my outside experience than I learned from the books that made no sense to read. The professional world I landed in is nothing like the world they pretended to prepare me for, COVID aside. There are more theatrical opportunities than just Broadway that needs to be addressed and taught. Also, my senior year, I begged to stage manage a show of my own because I had not gotten the opportunity to do so yet. They told me no because they had hired someone else instead, and I wouldn't have the opportunity, but I could work tech. As the show got closer, the outside hired stage manager decided to quit days before tech because the show was too much for her. So the production team brought me and the other two SM seniors to create a team and stage manage the show as a group last minute for no credit, just pay. Which made me mad because I asked to stage manage from the beginning. I graduated with a stage management degree without ever having stage managed my own show. Two professors made me feel very uncomfortable during BFA evals when they both suggested that I switch out of the acting track, which I found very offensive. They insinuated that performing wasn't for me, which quite frankly is a pretty shitty thing to do to a literal acting student. Professors should encourage their students, not seek to destroy self-confidence. When I called them out for it, they said they didn't mean it that way. What other way could they have meant it? As professors and educators, UIC staff needs to realize that their words carry weight. Accountability is necessary. I switched from BFA to a BA in performance after that to avoid spending lengths of time with professors that didn't make their students feel supported. I started doing more shows outside of school where I actually felt encouraged to pursue my passion. In general, I felt that the BFA evals were off-putting and pretty negative unless a student was a professor's favorite. Also, it was an overall very Eurocentric curriculum, and I didn't feel represented as a Latina actress. What kept me going during my time at UIC was my minor and doing acting gigs outside of school. Another student writes, they need to stop preaching on things they clearly don't do for the theater community. They just say things to save their school, but there aren't any actions being done. There needs to be a communication without people feeling attacked, and find a level where everyone can feel respected. No student feels comfortable enough to go to teachers for help when they know deep down the staff doesn't do what they preach. Another student writes, the theater design degree needs to actually be taken more seriously. The performer's degree is always bigger and has more effort put into it. It feels like the rest of us are an afterthought until we beg for more attention so we can learn. Clearly, the professors hired to teach have experience in multiple levels of entertainment and should teach as such. It's hard to learn when no one is willing to teach us, and the ones that are only stay for a few years. Classes not being offered every year is also detrimental to the students. It forces us to stay longer than we can afford just for 1 or 2 classes that may not even be useful later. It would be beneficial for a survey of what classes they would like to be offered for the next year, such as specialty classes like makeup and costume construction, because those are the classes that the design majors need but are always put last on the priority list because we aren't performers. Honestly, and maybe it's just my specific line of entertainment work, I haven't used much of my education as a professional performer and stage manager. The professor is incredibly problematic and despite multiple conversations cannot grasp simple race relations. He often uses offensive source material and refuses to change it. He allowed 2 of my classmates to belittle me when I wasn't around after we had a disagreement over the text. I was blindsided, and not once did he step in, and in the end, I had to leave the classroom. I dropped out of the class, and then he convinced my advisor to talk to me, which made me feel very uncomfortable as I do not need permission to leave a toxic environment. It felt like he just wanted to keep me there for his own ego and not my well-being. 2 other staff members refused to listen to me for 2 full years when I insisted my credits were being miscounted. It wasn't until I printed, underlined, and highlighted each transfer credit for them that they finally began helping me start the process to graduate. The whole ordeal was so belittling. I think just my advising screwing up how the rest of my UIC career went really was a pain in the ass. I feel that many people who had my advisor went through something similar. I think this is important because me being told to come to your session with your classes and code that you want to take and I'll just sign off on it is not advising. Especially when the point of an advising session is to work together to build a schedule that works for you and hits all the requirements in a way where you don't have to take over 20 credit hours for an entire year. Happened many years ago and I rarely spoke about it to those outside of my personal bubble, but my academic advisor, when made aware of my mental illnesses, told me that I should not pursue theater if that was going to be a problem I face. It destroyed my trust in staff and made me switch majors, never to look back. Another student writes, the theater department as a whole overlooks anyone they don't consider profitable or talented. I constantly felt like I was a burden on staff due to the accommodations that needed to be made for me due to mental health, physical health, and family troubles. There was always a long sigh, an eye roll, or apathy when it came to my concerns to where I didn't feel like I was able to reach out. I was told constantly by staff members to just get over my mental health. My concerns about Jonathan Abarbanel were never addressed or brought up and were made out to be that it was my fault that I was being annoying, as if they were pushing me under the rug. Graduating from this program has been underwhelming as well. I have asked about an exit interview on multiple occasions and have not gotten one. Christine nor my advisor have not been in contact with me at all, and when I've reached out to my advisor, it's been short and unhelpful. You have students making these quotes where they're saying that they've been begging for exit interviews, but the school that says that they lack specifics, the school that says students don't speak up, the school that says students don't have a voice for themselves are ignoring students who want to give you feedback. You're ignoring a student that wants to tell you, here's what I went through, we need to discuss. And this student can't get a meeting with you? But yet students don't evaluate. But students don't speak up. But it's the students that are the problem. You say that you have issues hearing student voices, and you say that students don't speak up, but you have a student that's trying to talk to you right now about their last 4-year experiences about an exit interview, but you're nowhere to be found. It's crickets. But I bet you've interviewed every single BFA before you went on summer vacation. I bet you've talked to every BFA that wanted to talk to you for their exit evaluation before they graduated. It's unacceptable. So unacceptable. He has also been incredibly unprofessional and consistently unhelpful. He always says he doesn't know something and will find out, but then never follows up. I even will have to go to Colette for a lot of things, despite her not being my advisor, due to the fact that mine was just useless. The transphobia is rampant. Almost every time I would correct a professor on my pronouns, I would get a long sigh. I would never get an apology, a correction, nothing. They would consistently call me by the wrong name, and they would laugh and make jokes about how hard it is to keep up because I've changed it so many times. My whole time at UIC, I felt like I was doing something wrong, and I felt incredibly alienated by the professors, which made me not want to be in that space and made it incredibly hard to make connections. Yasin and Christine have specifics already. I just believe this entire time they have been mishearing the specifics given to them and are scrambling to figure out what to do. First, they should listen to the students who decide to speak up. In most workplaces and public spaces, those who feel oppressed are oftentimes with muffled voices. So when a student comes to you with an issue, it has to be taken seriously. Too often I've heard stories from students who felt like they weren't being listened to when coming to UIC staff, so it's no surprise that they feel like they have no specifics. They have been on the defense for so long trying to prove that they aren't problematic, that they've allowed the same behavior to happen at their school over and over again. Second, UIC needs to make a public apology to students who have been voicing these concerns. You can't just say we took an anti-racist class and move on. Most of your BIPOC students who are still trying to pay off loans from a college experience that didn't serve them don't even know that you're doing all of this. Even now, you guys still only serve your own interests instead of truly fixing what's been going on. There needs to be a public apology and a very public action plan that reaches out to your entire community if you want to truly hold yourself accountable. Otherwise, you are just going to meetings and going home in the name of racism, and that isn't helpful to your current or future artists. There is lack of diversity in staff, and if diversity can't be accomplished, there needs to be an open dialogue to figure out what the student body needs. Create more electives. If UIC wants to offer checkoff and BBP, it should also offer August Wilson, Luis Alfaro, Lorraine Hansberry, Susan Laurie Parks, Carol Churchill. Listening to the students past and present is the only way to offer the education that'll give them the tools they need to succeed in this world. One student writes, yes, we need to see unprofessional, racist, misogynistic, transphobic, homophobic, and other hateful behavior openly curbed at UIC. Set a public standard for correctional action. Rather than quietly crossing your fingers and hoping no one will come forward with another strike against your staff, take immediate, clear action. Write up a list of restrictions that staff will experience if they exhibit harmful behavior and put it in the student handbook. Give students a tangible way to defend themselves when they are faced with hate, because currently, no one seems to be protecting them. If you do not think that setting a standard of consequences is too retaliatory for a school environment, I urge you to reconsider. College is a place where these students, many of whom belong to identities that put them into positions of power, will learn what the standards of our industry are. It is crucial that the example they see before them is one where cooperation and empathy are a necessity, where hate and exploitation are unacceptable, and where every member of a team can rely and trust on each other to be open and accountable for their actions. Another student writes, there were interactions with some professors that will still stick with me and rattle my confidence from time to time, but nothing that I feel compelled to report. I ultimately enjoyed my time at UIC a lot, but as a white man, I'm sure the experience was tailored to me in some ways. However, I've heard enough stories from other students to believe that there is an ongoing problem within the School of Theater and Music. I stand with those students, and my contribution to this is to implore those who are in charge to listen to these students and to take them seriously. Their stories are honest and affect their overall college experience, and oftentimes affects their artistic journeys as well. So, with all of that being said, I really hope that this video and my video that I uploaded in January provides people who come across it with some context of what goes on at UIC. When I tried to do this survey, I tried to reach out to an array of people who I knew had pleasant things to say about UIC, people who might not have had so many pleasant things to say about UIC, and the objective was to see, was there one common thread? I know when I was looking for schools in my time trying to figure out where I wanted to start my career, I couldn't really find testimonials like this. I did not know what school I was going into, and I know when I decided to go to UIC, I was taking a risk. I knew that when I walked into the building. The purpose of these videos is to hopefully help people after me take less of a risk. Hopefully you can have a better idea of what schools that you're going into, and hopefully if you're thinking about UIC, this has provided you clarity about what UIC's theater program is like. Like I've said a few times in this video, and I'll say it again to close, this is not just a UIC issue. This is an institutional issue. I think many theaters are structured this way. So since theater is structured this way, theater schools are structured this way, theater people are structured this way. I just hope the explicit detail that has been in play about what happened at UIC can allow people to look into their own institutions and figure out, am I contributing to these systems? Because you likely are. We all contribute to some system that we have privilege in. As a male, I have several privileges that allow me to navigate the world much easier than a whole half the population of the earth. You know, that's just a fact. So I hope that we're acknowledging all the things that allow us to move forward. If we're all about breaking these systems and all about being, you know, together, UIC wants to be held accountable for who they are today. But the school that I see today is a school that will still proudly push that they've made a land acknowledgement before they've even admitted indigenous students. They're a school who will walk around assuming that they're working on their race relation, when in reality, they've shrunk the black and brown population in their BFA classes, which everyone in UIC knows that they hold to the highest level of esteem when it comes to student achievement and education. Adults struggle speaking up against misconduct in their workspaces, but you want people fresh out of high school to supply you with the pulse of what's going on in your own school and what's going on with your own faculty. I see a school that's quick to erase the past before really mending the future. It's just, you have this anti-racist training in place to cover the mistakes that's happened in the past, but moving forward, there still isn't really a clear plan to me. During my meeting with Yasin and Christine, you know, I asked Yasin, okay, now that this anti-racist training is in place, if or when this stuff arises again, what's the game plan moving forward? And the only thing he could be able to tell me is that we address it and we talk to them. I really hope that the survey and all the other information that they've been gathering helps them see that this issue is a systemic issue. This issue has been happening over the course of several years. At this point, what goes down at UIC is a practice. This is less than 70 students' experiences. And there are about like 30 or 40 students in each class. Sorry about that. I had some technical difficulties at the end there, but to sum up the end of the video, I just really want to reiterate that this is a systemic issue. So far, they have been taking certain actions to improve the culture of their school. My only concern as a student comes from the lack of true acknowledgement of what is going on at UIC. One of my biggest takeaways from UIC actually happened on the very first day. The very first time I met Yasin and he looked at my entire ensemble of 18, he guaranteed us, he promised us that by the end of our 4-year journey, half of the room would be empty on day one. We were told that we lived in a culture where you guys are gonna quit. You guys will not want to be here. I only say this because I believe the irony comes from the idea that this program is so rigorous and intensive and it's not made for everyone. But the way I see it, you don't have to be Viola Davis to graduate UIC. For me, the question that I wonder is that if you know that your curriculum isn't super hard and that you typically don't fail people, why is it that so many people leave UIC? Why is it so ingrained in the culture that you expect half of your ensemble to leave? And why is that something that you welcome so much so to the point that you tell your freshmen on the first day of college that? They don't expect certain students to stay in their program, and I think that's by design. I think the program is designed for only a certain amount of students to succeed, and the prayer is that all the other people who aren't succeeding will just quit. And that is not the culture of a school. And as long as that's the foundation of your school, you can have as many meetings as you want. You can hire as many anti-racist committee staff members as you want. You can write as many land acknowledgements as you want. But at the end of the day, the root of the culture needs to change. And until UIC is ready to admit that an entire turnover needs to happen, I'm very doubtful that true impactful change for young minority students will happen at this university. I urge anyone who leads not just an educational or artistic institution, but any institution, to look inside yourself now and make sure that you are not exhibiting these practices. This is not just a UIC flaw, this is an American flaw. And I hope if we're really about fixing things in this country that we're doing what it takes to fix all of our institutions, even the ones that we benefit from.